as Chairman said, a non-formal introduction. So that makes me think. I mean, in some ways, obviously, you've seen what his achievements are in that small blurb at the end of the introduction, the announcement. Now, let me just say a couple of things here. And one is that, it was, I joined APU and I'd seen him here and there and just exchange hi and all of that. But it was the first time that he actually spoke in faculty collective that we got talking. He finished his talk and we went and sat. One of the Hosa Junction dhabas, had something to drink and non-alcoholic beverages were fine. And it got us talking so much so that we decided to teach a course together, which we talked to twice. And the only time we ever taught, sort of a class with anyone. I've never taught with anyone anywhere. So it's been a great experience. We intend to sort of renew it again this time around. I might say a couple more things about it. What comes across with someone like Anil is this very generous, gentle, genteel, literally humane human being, right? You see all of that when you're sharing a class with him, right? What you don't see, however, is to how sharp he is as a historian. That's exactly what you see when you're teaching him. Someone who has actually grown up intellectually in the late 90s and 2000s, you can then read modern history because that's the most important thing. And I mean, it is in many ways. The subaltern studies, the post-colonial studies, and so much as far as the company. And you think that you know a lot. Because, I mean, I ended up working with some historians and so forth, some really smart ones. And you think that you actually, because you've gone through that entire period, you know the stuff very well. And suddenly when you actually see a real historian who's done archival work, is when you realize how much you don't know, what it means to be doing archival work as to how it's very different from someone who's simply read a lot of books in history. So that's one of the things which stood out every time we take a class and talk and all of that. One more last anecdote, I'll take a minute about that. Everyone knows that he's a great foodie, right? So one of the things that happens is that when you go out and eat with him, fortunately and unfortunately, depending on the sort of station, your station in your life, one of the things that happens is that he doesn't allow you to pay. Even when he doesn't allow you to pay. I mean, not that that should sort of become a license for you to sort of, even if the bill is like $2,800 and so on, and he takes you to fanciest places. I mean, you decide to go to fanciest places, and then you realize you've been taken out for dinner. In other words, he's taking you out. One of the moments that really surprised me when Hosa Junction, you've seen the place, right? 100 meters from there, towards Concord, Midway, where you used to live, there is a new sort of, literally a kera had opened up with dosa, on it. Completely, dust laden in the worst way possible. And as I'm driving by that, who's standing there and eating? It's I mean, from Mekong, paying like $2,800 for dinner for two, to standing there and consuming food. So there are various such anecdotes which you can sort of tell about Anil. In any case, Anil, huge pleasure to introduce you, and great to hear from you. Thanks.
Thank you. I don't think I've ever been introduced like this. Thank you very so much. And, I do have a great interest in food and try to do a bit of, anthropology and sociology when I eat on the streets. But literally, this has been a very, very generous, quite literally a generous introduction. Thank you so much. What I will present today is called People, Princes and Purifiers, the Holi festival in 19th and early 20th century Punjab. And it comes from a dissertation, a PhD dissertation I did some while ago. Unfortunately, I didn't have the opportunity, couldn't publish it as a book, although papers, etc. have been published from it. And this, as all of you know, most of you know, was done under the supervision of Chris Bailey at Cambridge. So we also know that Chris died earlier this year on the 18th of April And when he died, Bhupin and other people said to me, why don't you speak about Chris from a personal and an academic perspective? And I couldn't at that point because the semester was drawing to a close and we were all very busy with our teaching, and we also couldn't find a window where we could all collect and talk about Chris. So I told Bhupendra that yes, whenever I present a paper in the faculty seminar, I shall certainly take 3 minutes to speak about my beloved teacher. And one of the things that really stood out about Chris, I thought, was that he was very liberal, very open and very democratic. And unlike many Indian scholars, he never tried to create an intellectual or an ideological following. He never tried to create a school of his own, as it were, right? This was something very big about him, I thought, because he was a man of great stature. In fact, he's been knighted, as you know, and he could have easily gone about creating some kind of an akhada, right? You have akhadas for wrestling, you have akhadas for poetry, you have akhadas for history, so on and so forth. But he didn't create an akhada of his own ever. Also, I think when we discussed things with him, we discussed them in the true sense of that word, in the sense that these were conversations about cracking a problem and about the historian's craft. Never polemical, never ever polemical. And therefore, for me, as a somewhat advanced, mature student, he was a very good sounding board. He had enormous knowledge of the South Asian archive, especially of the British Library, of the India Office records there, and which also explains, I think, his great historiographical range. So if you look at his work, it's evident that he's done so many different things, from looking at a locality, namely Allahabad, in the 19th century and the early 20th century and its connections with nationalism, to North Indian society as a whole in the century from 1770 to 1870, and there he looks at agriculture, trade, urbanization, indigenous origins of the colonial economy, kasbas, towns, merchant people, the rise of the middle classes, the origin of the Indian middle classes, and the focus is on how certain crucial continuities happened over a century or more, but continuities that went hand in hand with change. I don't think Indian historians were always very kind to him. They tried to argue that he was a neo-colonialist of sorts, but that was not the case. He was only actually trying to put forth a very sharp historical craft. He's also written about the information order, about the Indian ecumene. And I think very little work has been done on the Indian ecumene. It's a subject worth our study, and there should be much greater work on the shared cultures of the Indian elite and the middle class groups of the 19th century. He's also done work on patriotism, on the notions of ethical governance and ethical government. With Tim Harper, he did a bit of work in Southeast Asia, and also wrote a book on world history called The Birth of the Modern World, 1780 to 1914, which is a genuine world history. It's not a history of the West. It's a history of the whole world, and you can see how he makes very fascinating interconnections between different themes, whether it is modernity in the long 19th century from 1780 to 1914, and what connection does that have with clothing and different styles of clothing in that period, or whether it is with that century and food. I think some very fascinating connections are made there. All in all, I would just say, maybe we should have a more detailed discussion about Chris's work. I think we need to have one. I'll be very happy to speak at great length about his work. But all in all, I would say that he was not the sort to focus on contestations alone. He could debate with people, certainly, but he was very, very keen to actually synthesize work. And that is what you see both in The Birth of the Modern World as well as in Rulers, Townsmen and Bazaars, possibly his best book on India. So not focusing on contestations, encouraging synthesis, as a supervisor, telling people that, look, political correctness is important, but just as important is technical correctness. And it is because of all of these reasons that we all miss him so much. We continue to mourn his loss, and we feel that the quality of dialogue that was possible with him is very rare to find indeed. The work I did with him, as I said, was on communalism in the Punjab, on religious identities in the Punjab, on the making of religious identities in the Punjab from 1850 to 1920, on the formation of boundaries and identities, changing as these always are, and I looked at these at various interrelated levels. At the level of everyday life, at the level of the discourses of publicists, religious publicists. I don't like to use the word reformer, because one man's reform maybe that it's not reform for another woman. So therefore, I would use the word publicist. And also I looked at communal politics at the level of higher politics. So basically the attempt was to interconnect all of these three things. When I did this work in the 1990s, there was very little work on communalism as an ideological formation. So my work attempted to grasp the interplay between the symbolic and cultural aspects of religion and the creation of communal identities. And if one were to interconnect all these three levels, that is the level of daily life with what the publicists are saying, what kinds of discourses they are creating, with what is happening in high politics, such as riots over cow protection or kind killing, etc., etc., then it was very important also to look at how this shared culture in the Punjab in the first place was created, what its elements were, what its features were. And therefore, I spent at least a couple of chapters, maybe 1.5 chapters, on eclectic and syncretic elements in Punjabi society. Very often here in the university, in other people's seminars, I've had occasion to point out that sometimes we look at syncretic culture in a very embellished kind of way, in a utopian sense, and that is very wrong, because syncretism means the reconciliation of A and B in producing a C, whereas eclectic simply means that we are combining different things without wanting to reconcile opposites. So very often the shared religious culture of the Punjab, at least in my study, came out as eclectic rather than syncretic. And that also questioned the old nationalist historiography of Tarachand and company that posited it as syncretic alone. So it was in this context that I looked at the Holi festival, which is what I will present to you today. In short, what I'm saying, therefore, is that one, issues of power and sovereignty, of social practice and theology, helped create a shared culture in Punjab, elsewhere in South Asia. But all of these issues also actually contributed to limiting it in various ways. So I do this today through looking at the festival of Holi, and what I'll do is to present, really speaking, three models of Holi, if you like. You know, Anurag has been talking of 3 points every time he speaks, and I feel that I sort of have gone into the habit of using the phrase 3 models every time I speak. So one is Holi as a ritual of royalty, which is what Ranjit Singh and his court did. 2, the Holi of the people, which meant sharing of various types across class, caste, religion, and gender identities. But then, you know, as I say to you, this sharing had limits, and new limits were created to it in the late 19th century, as we shall see. And that the fact that new limits were created is the third model, really, of a sanitized Holi that Hindu, Arya Samaji, Sikh publicists tried to propagate in the late 19th and the early 20th centuries. Now, because the God of the historian lies in the detail, as Mark Locke said, and because I want to pay deference to that part of the historian, I think I should be reading my paper. Because you won't get the nuance of the argument unless I read it out. This paper is culled from larger work that examines the formation of religious boundaries in late 19th and early 20th century Punjab at various interrelated levels. In everyday life, in and through the discourses of reformers and publicists, and during events and periods of communal strife and antagonism. If daily interactions were marked by boundaries, this could only be so in the circumstances of a shared culture. Through an examination of the contextual and temporal changes in the Holi festival from the days of Ranjit Singh until the 1910s, the paper focuses on the ways in which urban middle-class reformers, Sanatanists, Arya and the Sikhs, backed by British moralizing modernizers, within quotes, sought to construct well-defined boundaries between religious communities, where hitherto these have been amorphous and fluid. These purifiers may not have consciously seen holy celebrations as ritual conversion, but surely they looked upon its revelry as intemperate and Rabelaisian. Consequently, they attempted to expunge carnivalesque and ludic elements from it, contributing in this manner to the weakening of the region's shared culture. Sikh ideologues tended to dismiss Holi as a Hindu event, and they succeeded in popularizing an alternative blueprint for the occasion in the cities. It is certainly the case that owing to a variety of influences, sectarian fractures deepened since the 1880s or so, yet it would not do to posit a neat movement from a pre-colonial syncretic society to one plagued by religious divisions in British times, as Harjot Oberoi does in his otherwise masterly treatment of 19th century popular religion. Composite culture and syncretic culture are omnibus constructs. There is a need to create a typology of these generic phenomena for 18th and 19th century Punjab. This is a very vast subject, in fact, and we might briefly consider it in the discussion. The major contemporaneous anthropological studies of the Holi festival have emphasized its temporally limited and contextually controlled inversion of the social and ritual principles of routine life. It has been demonstrated that social license, frenzy, the phallic theme, and pollution have been important constituents of the symbolic reversal of class and caste, and sometimes familial, that is family hierarchies during the celebrations. The few accounts of the festival that have survived from the Punjab of the previous century, all produced by the ruling or indigenous elite, describe it as a kind of Hindu saturnalia or carnival. The writers do not fail to comment on the jocose dialogues of the occasion and its leveling elements, objecting to what they felt were its undiscriminating and unchaste features. By far the most revelatory of these narratives is one provided by a British academic, John Campbell Oman, who witnessed them in a bazaar called the Machwa Bazaar, or the fish market of Lahore, sometimes in the first decade of the 20th century. Unshorn of the author's inclination for moral adjudication and for sermonizing on modernity, nonetheless, it makes for a detailed report of one particular celebration. Oman often dismissed popular actions associated with prescriptive inversions as obscene or primitive. However, an iconoclastic reading of his text, as of other sources, would enable us to discount their biases, to filter them from our reconstruction of the events contemporary observers described. In what follows, I rely not just on Oman's description of the celebrations he witnessed, but also newspaper reports, colonial ethnography, private accounts, reformist tracts, and oral testimony relating to Holi around the turn of the century. I quote Oman. He says, rude fun, a sort of disheveled gaiety, we are told, had prevailed over the crowded Machwa Bazaar for many days prior to the festival on the occasion Oman wrote about. Now, on the main day, hundreds of men and women, their faces and clothes besmirched with color, were jokingly moving about, exchanging foul words, I quote, in terms of quite primitive indecency. Soon the holy procession came rollicking along. One of its chief attractions was, and I quote, a young fellow on horseback, dressed up as a bridegroom, attended by rowdy companions who sang or rather shouted lustily rhymes of flagrant indecency. As they sang and gesticulated in choreographic style, they addressed themselves pointedly to the occupants of the windows and balconies, aiming at them the ribald shafts of buffoonery and coarse indecencies, too gross for reproduction or description. This tableau, and I am in quote now, this tableau called Barat in parts of North India signified the themes of sexual promiscuity, fertility, and a licensed violation of linguistic etiquette. It was followed by other bridegrooms, as also by the ascetic representation of Shiva, a man in flowing yellow hair, wearing a necklace of huge beads, holding a trident in his hand. His wife, consort and lover, Parvati, accompanied him. As a whole, then, the scene presented a synthesis of the ascetic Shiva, the destructive and the regenerative power of the Godhead, and the erotic form of the deity, namely his superabundant and fertile creativity. Traditionally, phallic symbols have been significant exhibits at such processions, and were so at this one too. Oman's Victorian morality masks him from telling us exactly what they were, but, he says, a group of youths, and I quote him, insulted, or more correctly amused, the spectators with them, perpetrating the grossest indecencies, and their proceedings were not resented except by banter and abusive words, unquote. Holi was also a time when women were addressed with the utmost familiarity, and as Shiv Chandra Bose wrote about North India of the 1870s, among the females of an upper-class home, I quote, some arm to the other would become the butt of their, that is the men's, rude and unseemly satire, unquote. However, family hierarchies and the rigid norms governing gender relationships were not entirely dispensed with for women, and not for all women equally. Instances from rural Punjab reveal that, like weddings, Holi could be a time for jests for some women, when the latter would beat the men of their family, village, or mohalla with sticks, call them names, and while reciting their genealogies, insult their elders and ancestors. Ridiculing the men in this manner was called Sitni Dena, this is Punjabi, and constituted, along with obscenities, a key tactic of symbolic role reversals during both Holi and at weddings. Among upper and middle caste groups, women who usually enjoyed this license were mothers-in-law, sisters-in-law, mothers of daughters-in-law, at times sisters, but never daughters-in-law. The holy processions that contemporary observers describe were colorful pageants of many different activities and groups. Cartloads of colored water being squirted especially at the street's upper windows, where the spectators of the better classes sat huddled together, that's not my phrase. A carriage occupied by courtesans, singing girls and their attendant musicians, and the gods, Krishna and the gopis, Ganesh, Shiv and Parvati. Myths relating Krishna and Prahlad to the festival and the semiotic significance of Shiva enabled the Shaivas as well as the major subsects of the Vaishnavas to relate to it. Many narratives speak about the topsy-turvy of status. Take, for instance, the lowly sadhu in Oman's account, flinging the turbans of his fellow riders on the road. In North Indian society, the turban signifies an individual's self-esteem and honor, and in a formal setting, it is removed in the presence of others as a mark of deference, dependence, or subservience, as a matter of lowering one's honor. It is never wrenched from the wearer except to taunt or humiliate him. The sadhu's burlesque was a reminder to dominant groups of the fate they might meet if their usurpations became boundless, or if the subalterns came into their own, as much as it was for him a release of anger against them. Similarly, in some areas of the province, the Jat peasants and the Mirasis, as most of you would know, were musicians and minstrels, would douse the local Khatri moneylender and rich landowner or Aurora trader with dung and urine from the cattle. It lay at the heart of the crowd's glee when the Mirasis, known for their quick brevity, would recite a tale of the unfair gains extorted by the victim's family down the years from the village poor. As with family relationships, specific caste groups were completely excluded from such liberties. While Jat, Mirasi, Sunar, that is goldsmiths, Mehra, that is cooks and water carriers, Nai, barbers, these men participated in the upturning of caste and class hierarchies in the village of Ranja, which is in Jhelum district, in Churkana and Niazbek, both in Lahore district, the Chamars, that is leather workers, and the Churas, the scavengers, had no participant status, only that of distant observers. Therefore, my findings do not quite tally with that of Mikim Marriott about Kishangarhi of the 1960s, a village of Mathura district, that the boldest features in the Holy Reversal there, he says, Marriott says, that in Mathura, the boldest features in a Holy Reversal were low caste women, and I quote him, and that insubordinate libido inundated all established hierarchies of age, sex, caste, wealth, and power. Unquote. It also needs to be stressed that these reversals, as we know from many studies, including Marriott's, were temporary and served to affirm the social control of the dominant classes, although at times they could be used as a take-off point for protest. What was the social composition of the crowds present at the spectacle that Oman describes? Oman lists a number of classes: the native officials, journalists of the vernacular press, barristers, merchants, artisans, laborers, beggars. Interestingly, he emphasizes, and I quote, all the Hindu world, and only the Hindu world in its various grades was here, wife and family included. Mohammedans, which was the nomenclature used for Muslims by those writing in English in the 19th century, were conspicuous by their absence. Not even one European police officer was present, and unless they were in disguise, no English or American people attended to enjoy the treat provided for the benefit of all who cared to partake of it. Unquote. Given the enormity of the social and cultural distance from the foreign rulers, given the enormity of the social and cultural distance between the foreign rulers and the Indian populace, so categorically expressed in the morphology of the tongues, as also generally speaking, the former's relegation of Indian popular practices to a lower grade of civilization, it is not surprising that the English and American residents of Lahore evinced little interest in these festivities. The involvement of Punjabi Muslims in Holi is a more complicated matter. Some residents of Lahore have reported that in the early 1920s, it was customary for Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs to exchange greetings during each other's festivals, but it was uncommon for Muslims to participate in the general holy roistering or in its procession. Now, a similar thing is reported by Intizar Hussain, the famous Pakistani short story writer who's written a lot of short stories about the partition. In an interview with Hola Mohalla, which is given in the book called Partition Dialogues, he says about Hapur that yes, the Muslims kept away from the festival, although of course a lot of people showed interest in it because they observed it in close quarters but never really participated in it. So, I mean, these findings tie up in some ways. But coming back to the Punjab, following the Rowlatt upsurge, that is the Jallianwala Bagh and related incidents of 1919, and the Muslim participation in the Ram Navami at Lahore that year, a tradition of holding joint meetings between Hindus and Muslims and mushairas during the major festivals was instituted. So this kind of a practice where many festivals, Hindu or Muslim, were observed jointly by people across the religious divisions. This practice continued until partition, but it had weakened considerably by the mid-1930s, with a small group of dedicated socialists holding it aloft after that period. These were latter-day innovations wherein religious festivals were beginning to be used for nationalist purposes. On certain occasions, the frenzy of the festival and the symbolic disorder it connoted could in fact provoke religious violence. For instance, on the 16th of March 1881, the last day of the Holi celebrations, some Hindus of Bahawalpur defiled the largest mosques of the city by taking a tazia, a replica of Hussein's tomb made of paper, cloth, wood and other materials, into the prayer halls of the mosques and by spitting inside the mosques. Lamenting the death of Hussein and frantically chanting his name, they also took the tazia in procession through parts of the city. As an obvious affront to Muslim sensibilities, the processionists shouted, "Surkha, Surkha, may you eat pork," at Muslim passers-by. The desecration of the mosques was brought under control only when a strong police force succeeded in dispersing the rioters. When the Nawab of Bahawalpur turned down you see, Bahawalpur was governed by a Nawab, as you know, turned down the demand of certain petitioners that the guilty be tried according to Muslim law and instead sought to punish them under the Indian Penal Code. Some Muslims attacked a couple of Hindu temples. Subsequently, these were restored to their original condition at the state's expense. The proceedings and records of the princely state of Bahawalpur are not available in the major archives that house material on the Punjab. Possibly this event was never documented in any detail. Contemporary newspapers reported it very slightly. Consequently, we do not know anything about either the circumstances that led to it or about the social background of the rioters. Nonetheless, a few significant observations can certainly be made. As is well known, taziyas are a key feature of Muharram, the festival of mourning for Hussein, the Prophet's martyred grandson, in which traditionally Hindus too have participated. Colonial and post-independence administrations have feared a breach of peace during Holi and Muharram, partly due to codes of violence internal to these festivals, but more because of and during periods of festival concurrence. So there were periods when the two festivals happened at the same time. Interestingly, in 1881, Muharram was not observed in the month of March, nor did any other Muslim festival overlap with Holi that year. A rowdy Holi crowd then, familiar with tazia construction, but unaffected by issues of competition over procession routes or sacred space, devised a novel method of polluting the mosques. From a purist Muslim point of view, the existence of a glazed replica in the prayer halls was anathema, because statues, ritual objects, pictures and tombs are all proscribed in mosques. Moreover, sections of the Muslim population were disturbed by the event because the holy revelers, masquerading as Muharram mourners, had entered the mosques in a ritually unclean state, drenched as they were in colored water that was reminiscent of blood. Likewise, generally speaking, Muharram processionists, bleeding from the physical torture they inflict on themselves to express grief, are not expected to pray in a mosque before performing wuzu or the necessary ritual ablutions. So both the Holi and Muharram have charged dramatic elements, albeit of different types, that are capable of generating aggression. In this instance, the two types of aggression blurred and intermingled, each giving way to the other. While we do not have ample detail to analyze the motives behind the attacks in the mosques or to work out how they were organized, we should not ignore the evidence that powerful symbolic images were evoked in the perpetration of the violence. Festivals that express the carnival principle and which reverse the normal body orientation to that of the grotesque, such as Holi and Muharram, contain the potential of interrogating and mocking the normal class arrangements, not just power and authority, but also the arrangements of sectarian relations. In contrast to the towns, Holi in the countryside seems to have been much more of a trans-denominational occasion in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Hindu, Muslim and Sikh peasants, all of them and their cultural vanguard, the mirasis, the minstrels, and the preponderant majority of the minstrels were Muslim, would merrily turn the world upside down that day. Ritual inversions, after all, were a secular aspect of Holi, since they were concerned with the organization of power within village and mohalla communities, and therefore cut across religious identities. In this, the shared culture of Holi was essentially different from that, say, of the Sufi shrines or of the worship of disease goddesses such as Shitla. And I've looked at all of these different kinds of shared religious cultures. While people of all the communities visited the tombs or propitiated Shitla, there were instances when these divinities were understood rather differently by Hindus and Muslims. But in the case of Holi, the non-religious dimensions attracted participants more than its folk theologies. Unlike the villages, the situation obtaining in Lahore and other large cities of the time around the turn of the century resulted from a greater self-consciousness regarding religious distinctions in urban areas. In overtly political centers like Lahore, both the pre-British and the British rulers had sought to build alliances with the elites on the basis of sect and community, thus contributing to a keen cultivation of these loyalties. Moreover, sectarian divisions within the great communities, expressed for instance in temple construction, always more clearly articulated in the cities, now helped foster the omnibus identities too. It would have been difficult by this time for anyone to feel they were Shia or Vaishnava without also feeling that they were Muslim or Hindu respectively. Lastly, the multifarious concurrent developments in colonial policy, in the institutional growth of the towns, and especially in social reform, contributed most decisively perhaps to the scenario that contemporary observers sketch of Muslim aloofness from Holi in the cities. It would be a folly to assume that the only functions the Holi served in 19th century Punjab were those of reinforcing the status quo through prescriptive inversions. Ranjit Singh, for example, used it in quite another way, as a premier vehicle of the display of monarchical pomp and power through an exhibition of the nobility's corporate effervescence each year that day. The this is a chronicle of the Maharaja's reign for the 1830s, composed by one of his wakils, and it can best be translated, the name literally would be translated as the finest of histories, the finest of histories, conveys his intense concern with the courtly organization of spectacles at the time of Holi, Basant and Vaisakhi. Ranjit Singh accorded such importance to Holi celebrations that he would personally inspect the gold and silver pitchkaris, squirts or squirt guns as we say, to be used, and occasionally even order his deputies to treat preparations for the festival as urgent. A typical function would involve a vast royal entourage, as in 1831. And I quote, Holi celebrations took place with great pomp and show, and all the wakils, chieftains, and Dewan Kirparam were present with the Maharaja. And the game of colour concluded with great pleasure and merriment. And everyone, great or small, was granted a reward in honour of the Holi. At about the third quarter of the day, in the open parade grounds, the platoons stood in lines on the right and left, and the game of colour was enjoyed by the nobility. At times, unquote, at times the prince could invite his British allies to witness and participate in the ceremony. It is possible that the king's persistent engagement with the symbolics of power was a consequence of his anxiety to stress his own legitimacy, as also the stability of a state fashioned from politics riven by conspiracy, treason, invasion, and impending conquest, with both the Marathas and the British knocking at the Punjab's door in the first half of the 19th century. But the choice of festivals as the site of the rituals of royalty is significant. These displays beguiled and impressed all the more because they were created out of events of mass appeal. What is of the utmost importance is the manner in which Ranjit Singh devised his ceremonial. If the people's Holi signified disorder and subversion, even if in a mock-belief world, The rulers signified order and authority. Ordinary folks, as men and moneylenders, may have tolerated reversals for a day, but not the monarch. Witness to the intestine warfare from which he had carved his kingdom, he probably thought even symbolic role reversal to be dangerous. He too deployed the festival to instill acquiescence in a world right side up and in his polity, but through a mirror image of the common ritual. Therefore, we have a prince in whose holy revelry only the nobility participated. The people were mere spectators. A prince who constructed spectacles around popular festivals to distribute gifts on one and receive nazars, a present from an inferior to a superior, on another, as at Basant, and thus affirm sovereignty. What was otherwise a practice of inversion became for the Sikh state a ritual of royalty. How can we understand, now come to the third quadrant as it were, how can we understand the temporal changes in phenomena like Holi? For the period after the 1880s, one may speak of them at least at two levels. First, there was the impact of social and political events such as nationalist activity, inflation, or communal tension on festivals from year to year. Despite the absence of meaningful serial data pertaining to festivals for our time period, it is possible to indicate some mutations at this level. Second, as I have stated, reformers, Sanatani, Arya and Sikh, made concerted attempts at altering the festival, although their success here seems to have been more modest as compared to the changes they had wrought in so-called syncretic religion. Backed by the Christian missions, the publicists, Arya and Sikh, instituted a pavitra Holi, discarding all the elements of the traditional celebrations. Fortunately, a public notice about the new event, as it occurred in Lahore in 1896, has come down to us. It announces a 3-day function of bhajans on Holi, imagine. Expositions of the Sikh Granth, recitation of Vedic mantras, sedate narration of anecdotes, temperance songs, lectures by Christian missionaries, Sikh bhais, and middle-class Khatri and Bengali spokesmen on subjects like notches, temperance, personal purity, and Holi, as well as a discussion of a report of the Punjab Purity Association and of a resolution regarding brothels. Most strikingly, this was one of the rare occasions when different sectarian organizations, the missionaries, the Aryas, the Sikhs, usually at loggerheads with each other, joined hands to reform it. This speaks not only of the popularity of this festival across the big denominations, especially the Hindu-Sikh continuum, but probably also of the mass appeal of its routines of reversal, and consequently of the difficulties that even powerful epistemes faced in wiping away its existing format. For this elite, notches, brothels, drunkenness, Holi were of a piece. All of these were immoral, obscene, wasteful, antiquated, hence worthy of condemnation. No distinctions were drawn here between social problems like drunkenness, for instance, and a popular entertainment like Holi, or within the latter, between its radical symbolism and its status quoist vulgarity. The Khalsa Tract Society. Some of you might know that after the Sikh Sabhas were established in the late 19th century, the Sikhs, as well as the Aryas and others, started practicing, they started this practice of publishing tracts and pamphlets on various issues for purposes of carrying out what they call reform. And this was obviously done along the lines of missionary practices of the same kind. So the Sikhs had a society called the Khalsa Tract Society. The Khalsa Tract or Pamphlet Society, established in 1894 along the lines of the missionary North Indian Tract and Book Society, published 2 inexpensive pamphlets on Holi in 1902, authored in all probability by the writer, journalist and exegete Ranjit Singh. These tracts designated Holi a Hindu event and instructed the Sikhs to stay away from it. They dismissed it as a lowly sport an occasion of defiant acts and undignified dancing. Written in simple language as a dialogue between ordinary people and a Sikh priest, it warned them that participation in the festival would reduce them to apostasy. And I quote, "Think for yourself, if a Sikh's turban falls off while he is playing Holi, he would become a Tankhaya, an apostate. If while playing Holi, any impure substance falls on the kesh, uncut hair, he would come to be an apostate. If dirty water falls on his hands, face or beard, he would fall into apostasy. If he visits a kanjar, low-born, or a kalal, a liquor distiller or seller, as was likely during this festival, he would degenerate to a major apostasy. Then why do you want to deliberately indulge in a game that renders you an apostate?" Unquote. The chief purpose of Tat Khalsa pamphleteering was to underscore the separateness of the Sikhs from the Hindu world and to chart distinctive life cycle rituals, forms of dress, and festivals for the community. Wherever possible, Sikh pedantic literature interwove these themes. Earlier, I have commented on the significance of the turban in Punjabi society. Its seizure from a Sikh was a particularly sensitive matter, for in this case, it connoted the infringement of distinctive bodily norms, disrespect for the kesh, and if done in the vicinity of the Granth, that is the Guru Granth Sahib, irreverence for the book. During the Holi revelry, such acts were not uncommon and were widely reported by the Sikh press. To buttress their cause, these reformers may have waxed eloquent on Ranjit Singh's political exploits, but they turned their backs on his holy regalia. After all, it was Ranjit Singh who used to play Holi as a matter of a ritual of royalty. To them, but to the Sikh publicists of the late 19th century, this bacchanalia endangered the Sikh look itself, and they used the argument to manufacture sectarian difference. However, in the rejection of Holi, this project coincided with their elitist values. Even an ephemeral overturning of class and status hierarchies was anathema. Contact with kanjars, liquor sellers, seriously sacrilegious. The tract forbade the Sikhs from song or mimicry, stating that a mimic was a blasphemer. Mimicry, it said, was the occupation of the vulgar folk, of the kamins, who had taken it to eke out a living. Mockery and satire triggered immoral thoughts among both the performers and the audience. For these reasons, the publicists maintained in the wisdom of Gurmat, which is the way of the Guru, they were objectionable and improper. The Singh Sabha leadership achieved some success in popularizing an alternative celebration to Holi called the Hola Mohalla, which some of you might have seen in North Indian cities, believed to have been instituted by Guru Gobind Singh. The core of the Sabha's festivities lay in a hymn-singing procession that attempted, among other things, to enact and project a martial image of the community. The Akalis bearing flagstaffs surmounted by spearheads, wearing a warlike headgear, were conspicuous in it, while it was led by a band of musicians with their cymbals and drums, playing English martial music. Many Sikh notables lent support to this cultural engineering, for it was intended to be a dignified public advertisement, and I'm quoting now, partly for official edification of the disapproval of the Sikhs of the usual license and freedom of the Holi. The dialectic of the British perception of the Sikhs and that of the Tat Khalsa played itself out vividly here. The Sikhs were a martial race, and they were different from Hindus. The Hola Mohalla was a series of innovations through which the Tat Khalsa sought to design a new festive cycle for the community, of which the Gurpurabs, or the birthdays of the Gurus, were a central feature. The Gurpurabs were popularized as festivals in early 20th century through tracts. Special tracts were issued and distributed to popularize the Gurpurabs, called Sade Gura Ka Gurpurab Aaya Hai and Sada Gurpurab. It is noteworthy that the Sikh state never used to observe the Gurpurabs, but observed the Holi. In conclusion, I would like to underscore that the Arya Samaji and Sikh Sabha purification of Holi was not an isolated development. Believing in theological boundedness, these ideologues widely used printing and publishing to denounce the Hindu and Sikh veneration of Sufi saints. In 1896, the exegete Dit Singh Gyani propagated first that the veneration of the Sufi saint Sarwar negated the existence of one omnipresent God. Secondly, he considered it improper for Sikhs to worship Muslim saints and for them to be guided in their religion by the Muslim Barais, that is, the custodians of Sarwar's tomb. Thirdly, he opposed the free intermixing of people from different religious backgrounds, as in a Sultani Sangh, that is, a group of Sultani people journeying to Nigaha, the headquarters of the Sarwar shrine, because it resulted, he said, in intercaste and inter-community commensality. For this Singh, it was inconceivable that people should violate existing codes of ritual pollution, that Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, or for that matter, Brahmins, Jats, Mazhabis, that is, Sikh Dalits, should all eat together during the period of pilgrimage. Fourth, he belaboured the idea that Sarwar's miracles were superstitious nonsense, and that thaumaturgy, that is, the working of miracles, did not necessarily require any supernatural powers. Consequently, in the Singh scheme of things, saints like Sarwar or Gograpi, creations of an unlettered peasantry, were to be completely renounced. According to an early 19th century legend, Sarwar had first blessed a Sikh woman, Dani Jatti, with a son. Then, considering her dishonest, had cursed her, causing the infant to die, and had finally revived it. The extent to which that Singh's reform influenced Sikh mentalities can be gauged from the fact that his invective persuaded even those who claimed to be Dani Jatti's descendants to give up allegiance to a family saint. Of 45 such families identified by the Khalsa Akhbar in the 1890s, 25 were initiated into the Khalsa and expressed gratitude to the reformer for putting them on the right path. On the eve of the 1911 census, Sikh newspapers instructed the Sikhs not to return themselves as Sultanis or as Sultani Sikhs. In their view, Sultani Sikh was a meaningless phrase, a contradiction in terms, since the former appellation denoted an Islamic identity and Sikhs could never be Muslims. The efforts of these purifiers to reorganize contemporary religious practices also led to a denunciation of the worship of the smallpox goddess Shitla. Interestingly, we do not get evidence of a Muslim censor of the veneration of this goddess from the Punjab, although this was on the agenda of the Paraisis, a reform movement active in eastern Bengal in largely the first half of the century. Dayanand Saraswati, however, criticized devotion to Shitla and saw it along with astrology, witchcraft, sorcery, magical healing, and the belief in Bhairava as charlatanism. Irrational in practice as these activities may have been for the rising middle classes of the day, and indeed ought to be for present-day historians, their vilification led people away from a world of composite traditions to an imagined purism of the Vedas, neatly fractured from tenets arising from other founts. Similarly, the Singh Sabha ideologues strenuously tried to dissuade their co-religionists from this unhealthy custom. They delivered speeches and incessantly wrote against Shitla and Devi worship, as also against other forms of folk religion. The theme received prominent treatment even in lesser-known Khalsa journals circulating in the localities, especially because tradition had it that Guru Gobind Singh was a devotee of Durga. The Sabha's spokesman and men, not women, sought to explain the supposed obeisance, arguing that in fact the Guru did not pay deference to any deity but looked upon the great women of the Panth as deities and quite appropriately saluted them. However, as with Holi and devotion to Sarwar, it is again important that these polemics were by no means the first opposition to Devi worship within the Sikh fold. An anonymous hagiographic text, the Saw Sakya, written around 1834, emphasized the norms of the Khalsa Rehdnamas and urged the righteous to refrain from venerating Shitla, as it had discouraged them from worshipping Sarwar and participating in Holi. In sharply distinguishing between religious communities and in stereotyping the religious other, the discursive themes of the Sanatanists, Arya Samadhis, and the Singh Sabha evoked notions of ritual purity and pollution, essentially the language of caste. Until the 1870s, the rhetoric and practice of commensality in the Punjab had emphasized the exclusion of both the lower castes as well as the Muslims and Christians by high caste Hindu groups like the Khatris and Brahmins. In the early decades of the 20th century, the Arya Samaj began campaigning for a discontinuation of such restrictions within Hindu society while desiring their retention at the level of Hindu-Muslim interaction. Often, reformist propaganda intermeshed many of these schemes and related them to various symbolic and material concerns. For instance, in urging Hindus and Sikhs not to frequent fairs at Muslim shrines in June 1907, a Sikh newspaper called the Khalsa Dharam Deepak of Batala chided its readers. You do not understand. No ties of food and drink bind us to them. These cow killers, who are they to us that we make offerings at their shrines? The Muslim fairs are held on Hindu and Sikh money. Yet today the Sikhs dare not establish jhatka shops. Spread the name of the Guru in every village and promote brotherhood amongst yourselves, so that love and harmony grow. Only then will the cause of the community be furthered. It is to be hoped that Khalsa brethren will not squander their wealth by visiting these fairs. So I stop here. Thanks.